Picture this. You're in bed with someone you care about. They suggest something that makes your internal alarm bells ring, not because it's dangerous, but because it just doesn't feel like a yes in your body. But instead of saying, actually, I'm not into that, you hear yourself saying, sure, sounds fun, with a smile that feels like plastic surgery. 30 minutes later, you're performing pleasure you don't feel, focusing so hard on their reactions that you've completely abandoned your own body. And afterward, you feel gross, disconnected, and somehow like you failed at sex, even though you did everything right. If this hits a little too close to home, welcome to the club nobody talks about, sexual fawning. Hey there, newsletter family. This is Dr. Misty with a bonus episode just for you beautiful humans who've chosen to go deeper with Untamed Ember. Today we're diving into the trauma response that doesn't get nearly enough airtime. The one that keeps so many of us trapped in performances of ourselves instead of living in our actual bodies. We're talking about the fawn response. And if you've ever wondered why setting boundaries feels impossible, why you can't stop prioritizing everyone else's comfort over your own, or why authentic pleasure feels like a foreign language, this episode is about to connect some dots that might just change everything. So get comfortable because we're going deep, we're getting personal, and I'm about to share some shit that makes my therapist proud and my inner golden girl clutch her pearls. You know, fight, flight, and freeze. But there's this fourth trauma response that's been hiding in plain sight, especially for those of us who learned early that being good was the only way to stay safe. Fawning is when you abandon your own needs, desires, and boundaries to keep others happy. It's people-pleasing cranked up to 11, and it's not just about being nice. It's a survival strategy. When a child's environment is unpredictable, chaotic, or emotionally unsafe, sometimes fighting back gets you punished harder. Running away isn't an option, and freezing might make things worse. So the nervous system gets creative and develops this brilliant adaptation. If I can just figure out what they want and give it to them, maybe I'll be safe. The fawn response is essentially shape-shifting for survival. You become whoever you think will keep you out of trouble, earn love, or avoid abandonment. Your authentic self becomes a liability, so you learn to bury it beneath layers of compliance. And here's where it gets complicated. This response often gets praised and rewarded. She's such a good girl. He's so helpful. What a sweet, accommodating child. The world reinforces fawning behavior because it's convenient for everyone else. But what happens when that good girl grows up and tries to have authentic relationships? When that helpful child becomes an adult who needs to advocate for their own needs? When someone who spent decades reading rooms and adjusting themselves tries to figure out what they actually want? The fawn response doesn't just disappear when you turn 18. It shows up in your friendships, your work relationships, your family dynamics, and most relevant to our conversation today, your romantic and sexual connections. Because if you learn that your value comes from keeping others happy, sex becomes another performance instead of a place of authentic connection and pleasure. Let's get real about how fawning shows up between the sheets, because this is where it gets both subtle and devastating. Sexual fawning might look like faking orgasms not just occasionally, but chronically, because their pleasure feels more important than your honesty. Agreeing to sexual activities that don't actually turn you on, because saying no feels scarier than enduring something that ranges from boring to actively unpleasant. Focusing entirely on your partner's experience while completely disconnecting from your own body, your own sensations, your own desires. Having sex when you don't want to because you're afraid they'll be disappointed, angry, or think you're broken. Performing enthusiasm you don't feel because you've learned that your authentic response is somehow not enough. Never asking for what you want because you've been conditioned to believe that your desires are selfish, too much, or inconvenient. And here's the really insidious part. Sexual fawning often gets mistaken for being a good lover. Our culture praises sexual partners who are giving, accommodating, low maintenance. We celebrate people who never say no, who always seem eager, who put their partner's pleasure first. But there's a massive difference between generous, enthusiastic consent and fawning your way through sexual experiences. One comes from abundance and choice. The other comes from fear and conditioning that taught you your authentic response isn't acceptable. For those of us with religious backgrounds or upbringing where virginity and purity were valued, this gets even more complicated. Purity culture teaches that sexual desire, especially femsexual desire, is dangerous, selfish, or suspect. So we learn to approach sex as service rather than mutual pleasure. We're taught that being giving sexually is virtuous, which can easily mask fawning behavior as moral goodness. And for my neurodivergent folks, many of us learned early that our natural responses were wrong or too much. We got the message that masking our authentic selves was necessary for social acceptance. This primes us perfectly for sexual fawning. We're already experts at reading what others want and shape-shifting to provide it. The tragedy of sexual fawning is that it prevents the very intimacy we're desperately seeking. When you're performing pleasure instead of feeling it, when you're focused on managing someone else's experience instead of having your own, connection becomes impossible. You might be physically present, but you're not actually there. I'm about to share something that makes me cringe, but I think you need to hear it, because chances are you'll recognize yourself in this story. A few years ago, I was in a relationship with someone who was, on paper, wonderful. Kind, thoughtful, attractive, successful, all the boxes checked. But there was this subtle dynamic where I found myself constantly adjusting to their preferences, their schedule, their way of doing things. In bed, they were pretty vocal about what they liked, which sounds healthy, right? Except I realized I was treating their preferences like assignments rather than information to play with. I became so focused on delivering the sexual experience they wanted that I completely lost track of what felt good to me. I remember one night, they wanted to try something that just didn't appeal to me, not because it was harmful or degrading, but because it wasn't my thing. And instead of saying, that's not really doing it for me, what about this instead? I performed enthusiasm. I acted like I was into it. I made the sounds I thought they wanted to hear. Afterward, I felt this hollow, gross feeling that I couldn't name at the time. I thought I was being a generous lover, but what I was actually doing was abandoning myself. I was so afraid of disappointing them, so conditioned to prioritize their experience over my own, that I chose performance over presence. The relationship ended for other reasons, but I realized later that my fawning had actually robbed us both of authentic intimacy. They never got to experience me being genuinely excited and engaged, and I never got to experience being fully myself in that relationship. Here's what I wish I'd known then. Your authentic response, even if it's not really my thing, is infinitely more valuable than your performance of what you think someone wants to hear. When you fawn sexually, you're not actually giving your partner a gift. You're giving them a performance. And most people, if they're honest, would rather have your authentic meh than your fabricated enthusiasm. So, where does this come from? Why do some of us develop fawn responses while others don't? Fawning typically develops in childhood environments where love and safety feel conditional. This doesn't necessarily mean dramatic abuse. It can be much more subtle than that. Maybe you grew up in a household where conflict was terrifying, so you learned to be the peacekeeper. Maybe you had a parent who struggled with their own emotional regulation, so you became responsible for managing their feelings. Maybe you were the good kid in a family where someone else was the problem child, and your role became making things easier for everyone. For many of us, fawning develops in religious or cultural environments that emphasize obedience, self-sacrifice, and putting others' needs first, especially for those socialized as girls or raised as AFAB. We learn that being good means being selfless, accommodating, and never causing problems. The message becomes, your worth depends on your usefulness to others. Your value lies in your ability to keep people happy. Your authentic self is selfish and unacceptable. And here's the thing that nobody tells you about fawn conditioning. It's often reinforced by people who genuinely love you. Your parents, teachers, religious leaders, they're not trying to harm you. They're operating from their own conditioning, their own fear-based beliefs about how to keep children safe in an unsafe world. But the impact is the same. You learn to read rooms instead of feeling your feelings. You learn to adjust instead of advocate. You learn that love is something you earn through performance rather than something you deserve simply for existing. This is why fawn responses are so persistent and so hard to recognize. They don't feel like trauma responses. They feel like being a good person. They feel like love and care and selflessness. The idea that these positive traits might actually be survival mechanisms can be genuinely shocking. So how do you recognize fawning, especially when it's been masquerading as a virtue for most of your life? Here are some questions to ask yourself. In relationships, do you find yourself constantly adjusting to other people's preferences? Do you struggle to identify what you actually want? Do you feel responsible for other people's emotions? Do you say yes when you mean no and then feel resentful later? Sexually, do you focus more on your partner's reactions than your own sensations? Have you ever faked pleasure to avoid disappointing someone? Do you agree to things that don't excite you because saying no feels too difficult? Do you struggle to ask for what you want, even with loving partners? In your body, do you notice yourself shape-shifting in different social contexts? Do you struggle to identify your own emotions or physical sensations? Do you feel disconnected from your body during intimate moments? In your mind, do you have a harsh inner critic that tells you you're selfish when you prioritize your own needs? Do you automatically assume that your authentic response will be disappointing to others? Do you feel guilty when you're not actively helping someone? Here's what's important to understand. Recognizing fawn patterns isn't about judgment, it's about compassion. These responses developed because they served you at some point. They kept you safe, helped you survive, allowed you to maintain connections in the best way you knew how. But what served you as a child might be limiting you as an adult. What protected you in unsafe environments might be preventing intimacy in safe relationships. Recovering from fawn responses is a process, not a destination. It's about gradually reclaiming parts of yourself that you learn to hide or suppress. Here are 3 practices to start with. Practice 1, the authentic response check-in. Before agreeing to anything, sexual or otherwise, pause and ask yourself, what is my authentic response to this? Not what you think you should feel, not what would make the other person happy, but what you actually feel in your body right now. Your authentic response might be enthusiasm, curiosity, hesitation, discomfort, or complete disinterest. All of these are valuable information. The goal isn't to always say no. It's to get clear on your actual yes versus your performed yes. Start practicing this with low-stakes situations. When someone suggests a restaurant, a movie, a way to spend an evening, pause and check in with yourself before automatically agreeing. Practice 2, the disappointment experiment. This one's challenging but necessary. Practice disappointing people in small ways. Say no to a social invitation you don't actually want to attend. Express a different opinion in a conversation. Choose the restaurant you prefer instead of automatically asking, what do you want? The goal is to discover that disappointing others doesn't actually lead to abandonment or catastrophe. Most of the time, people handle your authentic responses much better than your fawn-trained nervous system expects them to. Practice 3, somatic boundary practice. This one's specifically for sexual and intimate contexts. Practice feeling your boundaries in your body before you need to communicate them. Place your hands on your body, your chest, your belly, wherever feels grounding. Take several slow breaths and ask, what would feel like a yes right now? What would feel like a no? What would feel like curiosity? Don't judge whatever comes up. Just practice recognizing the physical sensations that accompany your authentic responses. Over time, this makes it easier to access your genuine desires in real-time, intimate situations. Here's the truth that nobody wants to tell you. Some people are going to be disappointed when you stop fawning. Some people have gotten comfortable with your shape-shifting, your constant accommodation, your willingness to prioritize their needs over your own. And their disappointment is not your responsibility. I know this might sound harsh, especially if you've been conditioned to believe that your job is to keep everyone happy. But here's what I want you to understand. People who truly love you want to be in relationship with your authentic self, not your performed self. A partner who's upset that you're no longer faking orgasms isn't upset about losing connection with you. They're upset about losing the performance that made them feel good about themselves. A friend who gets angry when you stop automatically saying yes to everything isn't missing your friendship. They're missing your consistent availability. This is hard to hear, and it might mean that some relationships change or even end as you reclaim your authenticity. But here's what you gain: the possibility of real intimacy, real connection, real pleasure that exists in your actual body, not in your performance of what you think others want. Your authentic self is not too much. Your needs are not inconvenient. Your pleasure is not selfish. Your boundaries are not mean. You were never supposed to be a human-shaped service provider. You were supposed to be a whole, complex, multifaceted person with your own desires, opinions, and autonomy. As we wrap up today's episode, I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine being in bed with someone and feeling completely present in your own body. Imagine expressing authentic pleasure when something feels good and authentic disinterest when something doesn't appeal to you. Imagine asking for what you want without shame and receiving your partner's authentic responses without taking them personally. Imagine relationships where you don't have to perform compatibility, where differences of opinion are interesting rather than threatening. Imagine showing up as your actual self and discovering that you're not only lovable, but you're more lovable when you're real. This isn't fantasy. This is what becomes possible when you start recovering from fawn responses. It's not easy work. Unlearning decades of conditioning never is, but it's some of the most important work you'll ever do. Because here's the thing. The world doesn't need another person who's perfected the art of being whoever others want them to be. The world needs you. Your actual thoughts, your real desires, your authentic responses, your genuine pleasure. Your refusal to fawn is a gift to everyone who gets to be in relationship with the real you. So this week, I invite you to try one small act of authenticity. Maybe it's expressing a preference you usually keep to yourself. Maybe it's saying no to something you don't actually want to do. Maybe it's having sex only when you genuinely want to, and being honest when you don't. Start small, be gentle with yourself, and remember, recovery from fawning isn't about becoming selfish. It's about becoming real. And for my newsletter family listening to this bonus episode, thank you for being part of this community where we can talk about the stuff that matters, where we can get real about the ways we've learned to hide ourselves and support each other in coming home to our bodies. This is Dr. Misty with Untamed Ember, reminding you that your authentic self is not a consolation prize. It's the whole fucking point. Until next time, practice disappointing people who expect you to be small. The world is waiting for you to take up the space you were always meant to occupy.